Joining us online is Emma Stevens from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, who works at the Lethbridge AFC Research and Development Center. I am going to be presenting a few of Emma's slides, but she's online to answer questions. So I'm going to just give a very quick overview of socioeconomics in the Living Labs, what that research is looking like. And then I'm going to pass things to John Zamet from UBC Okanagan, who is doing work specifically supporting the BC Living Lab. So let's get started. Let's push the right button. All right. Okay, so this is from Emma Stevens. Just giving a picture of overall in the Living Lab, Agricultural Climate Solutions Living Labs. One of the pillars in the Living Labs is socioeconomics, because we don't want to just see if the BMPs have benefits, but we want to know if farmers are going to adopt them. So there's a couple of layers of what that socioeconomic research looks like, and looking at the barriers and incentives to adoption. So the first layer is on-farm level enterprise analysis, which is really looking at the cost of production for implementing these BMPs. And some examples of what that work look like is adapting existing cost of production calculators to be able to calculate the specific BMPs. Yeah, and there's different things happening depending on the BMPs in different living labs. Then there's also whole farm analysis to look at the synergies and trade-offs with BMPs. So this would be looking at, for example, so for some BMPs, there might be higher costs, but if you look at the whole farm benefits from adopting the practice, there could be some other economic benefits that come from them. And then there's also sort of the short run costs versus the long run economic impact. So just needing to not just look at the upfront cost, but doing a whole farm analysis of what that looks like. So those are some of the types of analysis taking place across the living labs. Then there's also a regional or industry level analysis of diffusion of the innovation. And this is essentially looking at the periphery. So there are the living lab participants, and then there's the producers in that production type that are not involved in the living lab. So those are the periphery stakeholders. And the idea here is in year one to do a baseline survey that's looking at the level of adoption of the BMPs that are being studied in the living labs to see how many producers know about these, how many producers are already using them. And then again, in year 5, to do a follow-up survey using the same survey and same methodology to look at to see if more farmers have now adopted these BMPs. And this is just kind of a simple way to assess the effectiveness of the Living Labs program. And then there's additional socioeconomic questions that are being asked in different living labs. And so for some of these, it could be qualitative interviews that are taking place to look at some more detailed information on experiences and challenges with the BMPs being assessed, or doing different kinds of workshops or focus group sessions to dig into other types of socioeconomic questions. So some of the things that have come up in other living labs are marketing challenges, stress, mental health supports that are needed, looking at sort of the broader questions that could be affecting farmer adoption of BMPs. So specifically in the BC Living Lab, ACARN is supporting some of the socioeconomic analysis across the commodity partners. And so there's sort of two components of this. One is the economic analysis, and this part actually was identified by all of the different industry groups that they wanted to have cost benefit analysis completed. So in many cases, the industry partners have specific consultants or people that they're working with that will be doing this cost benefit analysis. But on the UBC Okanagan side, there is an interest in collecting consistent information as much as possible, although there are a lot of industry specific ways that this information needs to be collected, but looking at where we can be more consistent so that there is an opportunity to not just get the commodity specific farm level analysis, but also have a potential to compare across different types of commodities and and look at some landscape level analysis as well. And that would be taking place, all the years that those trials are taking place. And then there's the B&P adoption piece of it that runs in parallel. So we'd be doing the baseline survey that I described to see, basically to test awareness and adoption of the B&Ps at the beginning of the project and at the end of the project. Also, we will be working with the industry leads to identify people to interview to get who have already been practicing these B&Ps to get more detailed information about their experiences with these practices, what the barriers might be, and to help inform some of the knowledge transfer activities and even sort of the evaluation criteria. And then there also is an opportunity, because this is a 5-year project with socioeconomics as an important component, to do some further analysis, looking at economics, possibilities to do more targeted producer feedback over time, and look at some of the barriers to adoption in depth. And just in terms of sort of who is working on this, so Emma Stevens from AFC Lethbridge, she's actually supporting 4 living labs, and she's an agricultural economist. So she's sort of been a source of support across the living labs to help them design their research surveys and address some of these questions around economics and adoption. In addition, as I already mentioned, John Dammit from UBC Okanagan who's also an agricultural economist, is very keen on this work, and he has a new PhD student who will be starting in September, who will be working apart on this project. And Lee Cartier, who is on the virtual Zoom as well, from Okanagan College. He will be doing some cost-benefit analysis specific to the tree fruit and wine grape industry as part of the project. And I know that other industry groups like Cattle and Forage, for example, have industry consultants that they're working with. So I think, like some of the other components of the project, we have quite a little bit of work to do in terms of kind of lining everything up and creating more consistency on the economic analysis side. But we are starting to move ahead on that B&P adoption piece. And maybe I'll just pause here to see if people have questions just in terms of, especially for Emma Stevens, like if we have questions around the living labs overall and their approach to economic and socioeconomic analysis. Otherwise, I'll pass things to John to get started. Yeah.
So how much do we want or need to coordinate with her on this? So is she just doing the surveys?
No, not at all. Like, she's basically helping advise us, like she's kind of supporting us. Like, we're doing the survey and working with John, and Harmony is also part of this team, as well as John's perspective, a PhD student, Tim Kleinenberg, who's also joined online today. So we're basically working as a team to support the B&P adoption survey in partnership with the industry leads. So as like sort of a research partner looking at the biophysical elements, you don't have to coordinate on that at all. You don't have to worry about it.
You don't have to coordinate with me at all. It's fine. but also just in terms of maybe you're like thinking there is some sort of national sort of set of objectives that you have to meet or something like that on socioeconomics, and I don't think it's that structured. So I guess I'm in the science and technology branch as a research scientist, so my area of expertise is on farmer survey design. So I'm kind of coming at it more from that perspective and trying to offer insight or information or help where I can on getting useful information for you guys to get useful information. But beyond that, I think all the groups are quite different, and it's more coordination than that, I think, is quite difficult, just because all the living lab sites across the country are targeting really different BMPs.
Yeah, and I think there's different levels of like desire maybe too around how deep to go into this side of it. And in terms, like we do, as part of the Living Labs project, we do have to do the baseline survey, we do have to do a follow-up survey. For other Living Labs, it's a bit more simple because most of them are just working in one commodity. But because we're working in multi-commodities, we have a big periphery in our project. So this is a little more complicated maybe than the others, but it's not, the bar isn't that high, right, Emma? Yeah, and for the economics piece, I mean, that was a priority that the industry groups have all identified. So I think in terms of that piece, it's more seeing where we can bring things together and maybe get a little more out of it than just letting everybody do their own cost benefit analysis in the silo.
And just to say also, yeah, I prepared those slides because I wasn't completely sure of my schedule today. So thanks, Shauna, for handling that. But that is not, I don't speak for Living Labs division. I don't work for Living Labs division. And so this is just my take on what is probably going to be necessary to get answers to at least the economic questions that a lot of the groups have. I think it's not just adoption. You also need some detailed information on how the practices are really impacting either partially within the trial sites and then across the whole farm. I think that'll provide the picture that I think most of the groups are looking for, is like what is the true value of the BMPs, and you have to kind of look for it in different places. But again, I don't speak for Living Labs division at all, in case that's not clear. This is just more of a research take on what I think the groups are probably going to benefit most from in terms of looking at economic stuff. But yeah, I agree with Shauna too. There's some folks that are not really focusing on economic or cost benefit analysis or anything like that at all in their projects.
Seems like, I mean, a lot of the information that the biophysical researchers would want to be collecting should also be done. I mean, the whole like nutrient management component is a key part of the economics. And what I'm concerned about is multiple researchers or multiple players in this game are coming at the farmer from different directions with different questions that aren't coordinated.
Yeah, and I think the hope at the sort of like the industry lead level is that I think the people doing the economic analysis for the most part don't want to be the ones collecting the information directly from the farmers. That will either be done by like, maybe the person that's doing the nutrient budgeting in depth with the farmers, or it could be done by the project coordinator who's getting like the site history and that kind of information. So I think that might be the way it plays out, but because the economic questions are even a bit different depending on the production system, that has to be sort of defined. What data is needed needs to be defined for each of the commodity groups. Yeah.
Add to that answer. I think, Sean, you're absolutely right. I think we should be having some conversations about things that would be useful to collect. So if you need to use some different type of equipment, well, people who are doing the on-the-ground work will be able to record that. The amount of time it takes, the extra fuel requirement, that sort of stuff. And those are the physical impacts of adopting these things. And when we put prices on that, we turn it into an economic impact. So we shouldn't collect that stuff twice.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
And we should be talking to each other to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where we have to collect it twice. Because, for example, I mentioned the time it takes. That may not be an obvious thing that is thought about when you're just looking at, okay, I want to know the fuel because of the carbon emissions, and I want to know the fertilizer use because of the nitrogen, et cetera. And you just ignore the time. But as someone who's thinking about the total cost of the farmer, the time that it spends to do this is really important. So making sure that the question about, okay, how long does it take you to actually do this compared to what you did before is a very important question to ask, to look at what might be a barrier to somebody adopting it. But we should have those conversations so that those who are on the ground doing this, the natural data collection can be grabbing these extra variables at the same time, so that, yeah, we don't have this army of invaders on the farmer's land to learn 3 or 4 questions each time.
Yeah, which is also why this is, you know, one of the chunks on the agenda, so that we can have this cross conversation.
I'm just curious, I'm looking at your year one there, and it talks about a baseline survey of the BMPs or stakeholder producer community. And just above that, you talk about a broader periphery stakeholder community on EMP adoption. So when I read that, and I'm a farmer, I think you're going to be asking some other periphery stakeholders about my adoption of soil conservation. And I just wonder, like, who is these periphery stakeholder communities outside the farm community?
Right, I don't think that's what it's what it's intended to be, how it's intended to be phrased. The idea of the periphery, it's the people, it's the farmers that are not directly involved in the living lab. So it's not the farmers who have the trial, they're not the trial partners, they're like beyond that. So that when this term periphery is used in the living labs context, it's like the farmers that aren't part of the trials. The farmers that are doing the trials are the core, and then basically all other farmers.
Oh, okay, but I think you feel better.
Yeah.
You should say periphery farmers.
So the survey, yeah, periphery farmers, it's like, yeah.
Because if you go in Delta and they read that and they say, you're gonna ask all the wildlife people what we as farmers should be doing. And then we're gonna get kicked off our 5% farmer. So just be careful about the wording, because there's some sensitivity in some communities about another community outside farmers telling farmers what to do.
Yeah,
That's just a red flag. I just pointed out.
Yeah,
to you.
yeah. Okay, yes.
Can you go back one slide? As I think the question I have in here, I think you maybe said it, but you said the cost benefit analysis, people want that, the cost of production data. I understand like the socioeconomic and barriers, that survey that's going on, but it sounds like can you just kind of define what's going to be happening, what you're trying to plan across the project right now, and then difference between what the individual commodities are doing with contracted their own people, like are they getting extra data that's of extra importance? Like it would be great to know what the baseline involvement you get out of what's being planned now, so we don't want to go further.
Yeah, and I don't think there is. So again, it's kind of going back to the history, right, of the project, where it was sort of like each group figure out your own thing. So in that process, there were these individual strategies going on. So I think now we're trying to make a little bit, like John's kind of offered to be a bit of an umbrella, to be like, okay, I want to know exactly what each group is wanting to do, because then maybe there's some like umbrella analysis that could go on. But then with my other hat of like the Living Labs coordinator, it's like, okay, we need to figure out who doesn't have the support they need, what kind of information do you need, and how can we make that work in the project? And you know, I feel like economics is one of the things that's just been kind of like hunted down, because first we had to figure out who are the partners, what are the BMPs, you know, all of that. And now that we have those, which I feel like it hasn't been that long, now we can be like, okay, now we can build economics and figure out what that's going to look like. So I think the answer to the question is we don't know, but we're going to keep talking. We're going to keep talking, and we're gonna, and it's like priority right now that we're like, okay, we've gotten here. So now obviously so health needs more coordination, and so does economics.
Yeah, it's just like there's so many similar words that are really fast.
Mhm.
I like have been lost and confused in this many times.
Yeah. I feel like it's been one of the gaps, like in the project in the beginning. Yeah.
So can I ask a question from the hinterland here? So
Yeah.
when I hear this discussion of, and I've made this point before, when I hear the discussion about socioeconomic, I always hear examples given of the cost, but I don't hear the same level of discussion about the benefits. And then I don't know if there's some kind of clarity about what can be expected in this project in terms of benefits that could be weighed against the costs. And sort of a related question maybe, but a question is, you know, we say socioeconomic and then we just hear about economics. are we going to do anything socio, or is that just a subset of the economics? I don't think it should be myself, because I think really the ace in the hole here is the socio part, because there's all kinds of possibilities of inspiring people to do things nowadays that don't necessarily involve greater profit. They don't want to lose their shirt, obviously, but there's promotion, there's salesmanship, there's just all discussion on community groups. There's just so many things, right? And so I think that shouldn't be left out. I think that's very strong.
Perfect, Chef. I thank you for creating segue to John Donman's presentation. So, here you go. And Emma, please stay there because I feel like it would be great to have you.
Sure.
Oh, okay. Do you want to just read out?
Oh, yeah, sure. So Hans is asking, like, for the cost benefit, would be helpful to have a list of specific items to track, and also what information is required from the researchers to get some of the more suitable and longer term benefits.
I think that's exactly the thing that we need to be talking about. The one example being the extra time commitment needed. Got to make sure to figure out how to include that. We got to think about how sort of payback period people are looking for. Are people looking for a 2-year return on their investment, or are they willing to invest for 10 years? Those are differences between people, but also what is the payback of this particular BMP? Do you see it like next year? Something that might be short-term, like a cover crop after corn silage you can harvest and feed, you've got an impact next year. But if you're talking about something that slowly builds up soil organic material that benefits a perennial crop, it might be a very long-term payback. So knowing what type of payback there is on there and what sort of time horizons, all those sort of things. And yeah, that's exactly, I think, the point Sean was making too. We should be talking among the different commodity groups to get a handle on what these list of questions need to be. Some of the questions will be much more relevant for one commodity group than another, but they are, I think, a common set of questions. And we have to develop it. We're not fully there yet, but I think we're working on it. And the more we keep talking, the further along and the better we're going to get.